Hello and welcome to another episode of the Diet Obsessed podcast. I am your host, Veronica Santarelli. I am a certified personal trainer, nutrition and weight loss coach, and this podcast is for those of us who are just obsessed with everything related to improving health and longevity, with a special emphasis on food, fitness, and diet culture. All right, let's get into the show. Now, if you want to support the show, there are a few ways you can do that. So if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world to us podcasters. If you're listening on any other podcast medium, you can subscribe to my premium content. So this is one of my free shows. I do 2 free shows every other week, and then every other week I have a premium content show. Those are extra juicy, extra personal, extra controversial topics, and stuff I just don't want, displayed or broadcast to the general public. So there's a couple ways you can subscribe. You can subscribe through Patreon. There's actually a VIP tier on Patreon. You can also subscribe through anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts. And then if you don't want to spend any money, you can just leave a rating or review. That means the world to us podcasters, especially on iTunes. Just leave a comment, leave some stars. It really helps us out. And I appreciate your support. All right, everyone, let's get into my mental health check-in. So I am in a really good mood today. It's Sunday. I am getting ahead of the holiday season. So today is Sunday the 14th. And so this is not going to air until the 28th. So just after the holidays. So when you're hearing this, you will have just celebrated with your friends and family. And I am actually leaving on a red eye this Wednesday. So I'm just trying to get ahead of things, doing my laundry, just trying to prepare so I can really relax and be present with my family when I'm in Maine and on the East Coast. So very excited to go home to see my family. I'm not looking forward to the flight, right? I'm taking a red eye on Wednesday and I have to work as soon as I get there. So I'm hoping I sleep. I'm not a good plane sleeper. It is really, really, really hard for me to sleep on a plane, especially if I'm in the middle seat, which somehow I always end up in a middle seat for whatever reason. I'm not one of those people that checks in on time. So I usually end up getting stuck in the middle and I have to fly Southwest, which is no room in those seats. So I'm mentally preparing for an uncomfortable journey, but once I get there, it'll be fine. I'll make it through the day. And then I'll just have a couple more days to get through before the weekend. And then I'll have the weekend completely off and I can just spend time with my family. So I'm very, very, very excited for all of that. Are you someone that likes the holidays? Do you like Christmas? I know some people hate it. Some people hate the holidays and get sad and depressed. I'm the opposite. I get really happy and joyful, and I feel like this is magical time of year, and I love seeing the lights, and I just love that I get to see my family this time of year. So we have our very strong Christmas tradition where we have a little get together on Christmas Eve and we eat all kinds of really delicious food and have really good wine because my sister's married to a sommelier. So she usually brings over some delicious charcuterie. My mom has an incredible spread of home cooked food. We're drinking wine, we're talking, we're enjoying each other's company. So it's always, I love being around my family. So I'm very lucky that we have a very small family, but we're all very, very close. So excited for that. I just had brunch with a friend. So I had a couple sangrias, so feeling pretty good. And we had a good conversation. It was just really nice to catch up with her because I haven't seen her in a couple weeks. And we had a delicious meal, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. But yesterday was Saturday, we went to a friend's 50th birthday party, which was very fun. And I was a little bit tired this morning, but it was fun to celebrate her. She just had it at her house, and she had a little dance party at the end of the day, so that was really fun. And yesterday, so Saturday, I usually have clients all morning. It's usually my busiest day. I usually have a 6 a.m., a 7 a.m. Oh my God, my dogs. Yeah, so Saturday is usually my busiest day with personal training clients. I usually have a 6 a.m., 7 a.m., I usually have an 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and so I usually have anywhere from 4 to 5 clients on a Saturday. Now, this Saturday, I had a couple of people cancel. I went into Saturday only having a 6 a.m. and a 9 a.m., which I hate that. I hate having a big block in between. And I don't love getting up at 4 a.m. on a Saturday. So I get up because I usually get up at like 4:07, 4:15, something like that. And I got up and I was like drinking my coffee. I was just getting hydrated and awake. And at like 4:45, my client texts me and she's like, to cancel. Now, I normally do not charge people. If they give me 24-hour notice, if they, even if they, like, if I had heard from her at 3 a.m., if she texted me before I woke up and started getting ready and started caffeinating and waking up, I wouldn't have charged her for that session. But I had already gotten up for her and was like getting in the process of getting ready for her. And I had declined another 6 a.m. client. So I did end up charging her for the session. I let her know I don't like to do that with people, but if I'm turning down business to make room for another client, I do have to charge them. So I ended up not having a client at 6 a.m. and I just kind of hung out and actually did a podcast review for this show, which I'll go over in a minute. I have a really good episode all about SNAP benefits and charity and all that. So I think it'll be a good topic. But so she canceled. And so I had a long morning because I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't have to be until 9. So let me get my own workout done. So I got my workout done. I ended up getting my podcast review done. And then like an hour before my 9 a.m., my client told me she was getting sick and she didn't want to get me sick. And so my 9 a.m. client canceled. So I literally had no clients on Saturday. And even though I do like to make money and I do like to, have my clients show up and get results, because that's what they're here for, I also don't mind it when people cancel. Like I had, especially my 5 a.m. clients. When my 5 a.m. clients cancel in a timely manner, I'm kind of like, okay, I get to get a little more sleep today. So anyway, it ends up working out when people, I mean, you never want your clients to cancel on you, but if they do, I get extra sleep and that's never a bad thing. So anyway, so this week I am mentally preparing for it because I usually have Tuesdays off and I usually get to sleep in on Tuesdays. But this week I have a 5 a.m. client Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I take the red eye that night. So it's going to be a very intense week, a short week, a very, very busy week. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to get ahead of the show. I wanted to get this done. I normally would do it on a Tuesday, but I agreed to take some clients on Tuesday since I'm going away until almost the new year. I'm like, might as well fit in as many as I can in the beginning of the week and get them some results before they go into probably an indulgent holiday season. And I'll feel good that I did as much work as I could before I left. So anyway, that is my mental health check-in of the week. I hope all of you have had a great mental health week yourselves. All right, let's get into a surgical situation segment. A new segment for me, a new topic. I have been kind of lumping all of my anything to do with cosmetic surgery, skincare, all of this stuff under my longevity lifestyle segment. And I'm like, cosmetic surgery has nothing to do with longevity, right? That's not helping you live longer. It just makes you look better. So I'm like, I need a different header for this topic. So I wanted to create one because I do like to talk about cosmetic surgery quite a bit. So I'm like, it deserves its own segment. So I was on Instagram the other day and I saw that Eileen from Betches, she was one of the original hosts of Diet Starts Tomorrow. She had just recently had a mommy makeover. Now, Eileen and Sammy were the two that hosted Diet Starts Tomorrow before they became so successful that they ended up hiring some other podcasters to take over that. And they both had started that show kind of as they reflected back on the beginnings of that show. They're like, oh, we were totally disordered. We were constantly talking about how to get thinner, how to shrink ourselves. And as the podcast evolved and we went through the body positivity movement and the pandemic, and they started realizing that some of their content they had produced in their eyes became kind of problematic. And they also didn't want to overanalyze their bodies anymore, talk about their own lives so much. So they ended up replacing themselves. Now, subsequently, Sammy went on the GLP-1s. Sammy is in a much smaller body now and talked about, kind of like Amy Schumer, talked about how it was really for her health, that she did realize that, and her doctor confirmed that she was a very good candidate for it. She had the PCOS, she was pre-diabetic, she had a lot of food noise, and you can just tell she's living her best life now. She's still a very adventurous, and again, I would love to have a full podcast where she talks about this. I would love to hear how it's changed her life and her mentality around food. And so now Eileen hasn't talked about doing the GLP-1s. I don't know if she has, but she did have a baby recently. And then she posted a picture like on vacation. She like took a shot like this in a bikini. And she's like, I really haven't told anyone, but I had a mommy makeover and I just wanted to share that. And she was expecting a lot of hate. She was expecting a lot of judgment and harsh feedback from her audience. And because I think in the past, maybe she was herself, maybe not critical of other people that did stuff like this, but you can see how she's evolved. And same thing with Sammy, right? I think time, your feelings change on some certain topics, and maybe what you didn't believe was something that you would ever consider in the past might be different in the future. And people are allowed to do that, right? People are allowed to change their minds. They're allowed to change their opinions. They're allowed to evolve. And she was expecting a lot of hate and judgment from her community. But as I talked about on the last show, cosmetic surgery is very socially acceptable now, more accessible to everyday people than it ever was before. In the past, it was only celebrities that really did it, and it was very hush-hush, or the very wealthy, and you can see some of the people that were the original people that had those facelifts and looked like the cat lady. I mean, obviously, again, the knowledge around how to do these facelifts has evolved as well. And just like Taylor Strucker was talking about on her show, she's like, well, hopefully, these people getting these $250,000 facelifts, like Kris Jenner, she's like, hopefully by the time I need one, she's like, hopefully they'll be more affordable. And all these other plastic surgeons that are just coming out of, getting out of school and starting to build their practice, they're learning these techniques and they can become more affordable for like the regular person. Now, Caroline Stanbury had a facelift at, I think she was 40. I think she was my age when she had it. When did Caroline Stanbury have her facelift? How old was she? 47. So Now, I would never have a facelift right now. I don't think that I need it. Do I need a little Ellacor to get rid of these jowls? Yes. Can I lose a little tightening of the neck? So, but I think I will probably get one someday, but I would like it to be affordable. I would like it to be more like 30,000 versus 250,000, right? But anyway, so Eileen did end up getting a mommy makeover. She could see her stomach. She said she'd done a lot of research and she's very, very happy. She ended up answering some questions. She came back on and she's like, oh my God, you guys. She's like, I was so scared to share that. And she's like, but I actually got a lot more positive feedback than I thought I would. And she said, a lot of you have questions. I just want to answer some of your questions. And so she talked about the doctor that she had gone to, which was a New York physician, and she'd done a ton of research. She said she was really analyzing the before and after pictures of patients on all kinds of different surgeons' websites. And she was specifically looking at the belly button. She's like, I really want the belly button to look good. She looks great. She posted a picture kind of above, and then she posted a picture from kind of far away. And you can tell she's just very confident and she feels great about herself. And again, there's some people that will never do anything like that and either can't afford it or it's just not something that they don't dare to go under the knife or have anesthesia, because it is always a risk when you go under the knife or go under anesthesia. You are risking your life. So as always, to each her own. This is something that Eileen chose to do for herself. It's something that's making her feel better. She's posting in a bikini. You can tell how confident she is and how good she feels about her body. So cheers to you, Eileen. You look great. And thank you for sharing, because we all want to know. We all want to know how everyone's looking so good, especially after they have a baby or whatever. You just want to know the people that you're following and people that, Sammy and Eileen were, I definitely think, more conservative with these types of things in the past. And I think they've evolved. And I think it's nice to see that, nice to hear about it. I love when people share about the work that they've done. So anyway, that is my surgical situation segment of the week. All right, let's get into a foodie affair. So here's the topic, okay? And let me ask you this, okay? You're out to dinner. Let me set the scene, okay? You're out to dinner with a big group, okay? There's, or maybe it's not even a big group. Say it's a group of 4 to 6 people. You're out to dinner. And maybe there's 2 appetizers that are ordered. Say a thing of meatballs and a salmon sashimi or something. And of course, there's the whole etiquette, right? Who's going to actually be the first one to take that first bite? I've talked about how in the past, it's sometimes things sit there getting cold, getting warm, right? Salmon sashimi should be eaten in a timely manner because it's nice and chilled and fresh and you don't want it just sitting there. Right. So I've started being okay, if it's just sitting there, I'm going to be the first one to make it acceptable to start taking food. And Heather McDonald had Guy Branum on her show this week. I love Guy Branum. He's hilarious. He's a comedian. He's a writer, very smart guy. And they started talking about, going out. They just had this little section in this most recent podcast where Heather was just talking about how she loves going out to eat with people and how she loves people that will share and how she believes that 2 appetizers and an entree is the perfection. It's the way that you can sample a lot of stuff, have a lot of different tastes, and have the perfect amount to eat and not be overfull and not feel like you haven't had enough. So I think that's an interesting concept. Guy is well, sharing does take a level of trust. And I know what he means, right? Some people just don't like to share their food. I'm someone that can go either way. I like it. My sister likes to share. She likes to order a ton of dishes and just have everybody share. I also do like that. I like to taste as many things as I possibly can. So I do like that. But I'm also okay to have my own meal so I can take home some leftovers at the end of the night. So I'm fine with either way. But Guy was saying, he's like, I have gotten to the point in my middle age where he's like, I will take that last squash blossom. And Heather's like, oh, she's like, totally. She's like, there's so many times when I would go out to eat with people and I would see, or I'd be out to dinner and I'd see this table and like no one would be that person that would take the last piece, right? And because they were so caught up in being polite and not being that person that takes the last one. The server's like, should I get this out of the way? And there's one piece left. And Heather's like, she's like, I would always watch fascinated that people would let that meatball go. She's like, she'd just be like, what? Like, how would you just like not eat that last meatball or take it with you? And she's like, I think I personally think I still have my mother's sensibility inside my head. She's like, no, that's a good piece of salmon. She's like, we're not letting that go. She's like, you can't always get salmon like that. And she said, I don't care if you have to, she's like, I don't care if you're full. She's like, shove it down your gullet and move on. She said, I still have the cheap gene where I need to save up for winter. She said, I don't know when I'm going to go out to a nice restaurant and have a nice piece of fish like that. And it's so funny to hear. And again, very relatable, especially for me, because I also share that same, like she calls it the cheap gene. I call it maybe my genetics tie back to the Holocaust when people starved, or somewhere in my genetic background, people went hungry. And so I feel like I'm somebody that's stuck in the depression, needs to save every little scrap of food and not let anything go to waste. That is me. And so to hear Heather's like very wealthy at this point, but she still has that inside her where she's like, I don't want to let food go to waste. I will take it home. I will eat that last meatball. I would take that last piece of salmon. Like, why would you let that go? And I'm sometimes with tables that will be like, well, if no one else is going to eat it, I'll eat it. So a lot of times I'm with somebody that will do that. And if they didn't do it, I would do it because I'm like, no, we're not going to waste food. Hello. So Heather feels that way. Guy feels that way. He was like, I used to go out to dinner with a bunch of women from this specific show. He's like, I used to get so mad because nobody would eat. And yeah, I would hate to go out with people that don't eat. It's like, what's the point? Hello, we're here to eat. All my best friends love to eat, just like I do. All my favorite friends too. We're eaters. We like to feed ourselves. We like to taste a lot of different things. And anyway, I just think that that's crazy to like let something go to waste for politeness. And it's stupid. Anyway, waste not, want not, right? So what do you think about this? Are you someone that will take that last piece? Are you somebody that believes in being polite and that you're embarrassed to take that last piece? Feel free to DM me if you feel strongly about this and want to share. I love hearing from you guys. And that is my foodie affair of the week. All right, let's get into my healthy habits of the week. So this week, now I will say, because I was sick for that whole week. I didn't really eat that much. I was eating a lot of soup. And this past week, same thing. I ate a lot of soup with walnuts. I kept doing my superfood smoothies, had a lot of egg on toast. And usually this is the time of year where I let myself really indulge a lot more and don't have the same kind of balance I do the rest of the year. I will say I've had more balance going into this holiday season than in past years. I think part of it is the training, is personal training, and feeling like I do feel not pressure, not expectation, but just that I do want to feel my best when I'm training clients. And if I'm feeling like I'm overindulging and not working out, I don't feel good, and I do need to feel good to show up for them. So I think that's part of it. I also think I've just been so busy and haven't had as much time. And so that's part of it. And it's the recognition of that the indulgent stuff tastes more when you have more balance in your life, right? If you've been eating really, light whole foods all day, you really want that ice cream or that donut or whatever it is that you're going to indulge in. It just tastes better because you've been eating so clean all day, quote unquote clean. And it's that little treat and it's that juxtaposition of something that's, you eat 80% really, really healthy whole foods, nutrient dense foods that day. And then you have your treat at the end of the day. That's what I like to do anyway. So, but yeah, I was feeling good working out. Today I took a nice walk with my friend before we went to brunch. We were supposed to play pickleball, but her pickleball courts were locked for some reason and her key wasn't working. So we just went on a walk. And then yesterday, my client, I was going to get a workout anyway. If both my clients had shown up, I had that long break in the middle of the day and I'm like, oh, I'll just get a really good workout in. And so I've just been, keeping very, very active and doing a lot of strength training, cardio. So feeling really good, going into this holiday season. And those were my healthy habits of the week. All right, let's get into my tasty treats of the week. So this week, now I talked about on my last podcast that I was like so proud of myself. I made these homemade donuts. They were pumpkin with a brown sugar icing. And I ended up eating, I don't know, maybe 3 the day that I made them. And then I froze the rest. And so I still have quite a few of those donuts left. I thought I might eat them during the week. I didn't. So now I still have a lot of those donuts left. They're almost too moist. They're like wet. It's because it's like made of pumpkin. There's pumpkin in there and I don't know if that's creating some sort of sogginess, but they still taste really good. They're just overly like moist. Not a bad thing, but the texture is slightly off. I'm sure I'll eat all of them though. And then I actually probably should have put this under my healthy habits, but because at my brunch, I did have some sangrias, which were, good. I love white sangria. But I did make a healthy choice for the food. I had some fajitas. I did this jalapeno steak fajitas. I chose the flour tortillas over the corn tortillas. I don't like the corn tortilla. I don't like the texture. I love a flour tortilla, a little bit of guac. Oh my God, the chips that they served were the best kind of chip. Those ones that you can tell they're just deep fried and they have those bubbles on them. Oh my God, they're almost like a crispy wonton, but even thicker and more indulgent. So good. The salsa was good. They made a homemade salsa. It wasn't the best salsa I've had. I think the best salsa that I've had around Phoenix is from Local Patron. I don't know if you've ever been there, but they have the best salsa. It's like very chopped up and they don't have the big chunks of tomato. I don't really like the big chunky tomato salsa. But so this one was kind of that. So it was fine. It was okay. It wasn't the best. The guac was really good. I love guacamole. So that's what I had for my lunch brunch. And it was very good. Fajitas aren't bad for you. So good high protein. I still have a ton of it left. So maybe eat a little bit of that later. Now my team, my supervisor at my job wanted to have a little team meeting in person for those that could make it. And he wanted to have a potluck. And so we were all being like, oh, I'll make this, or oh, I'll bring this. And I wanted to cook something. But I wanted it to be something that would travel well, not be too difficult because I just don't have that much time. And at first I was going to make the chicken lettuce wraps, and it was a little bit more labor intensive than I ended up making my own version of an Asian fried rice. It was very similar to the egg roll mixture I had made, but I put it on rice. It was okay. It didn't have as much flavor. I think there was just too much rice to the pork and vegetables that I made. So just didn't have as much flavor as I wanted it to. And so it was okay. It wasn't my finest moment. People said they liked it, but the rest of the potluck food there was a girl that did make a homemade salsa that was very good. It was chunky, but it was very spicy. So it was really good. And then what else? Oh, so I was so happy. One of the girls that I work with made these Filipino, she called them spring rolls. They seemed like egg rolls. They didn't have any vegetables in them. They had a little bit of meat. I don't know if it was pork. I think it was pork. But it was actually perfect because she brought soy sauce and she brought, I guess Filipinos put a little bit of lemon juice in their soy sauce. She brought 3 different sauces, the soy sauce, lemon juice, and this sweet and sour type sauce. And I was like, oh, I've never had lemon juice in my soy sauce. Let me try that. It was really good. And it was nice because it was perfect with my fried rice that didn't have a ton of flavor, because you could take a bite of the rice, dip the egg roll in the soy sauce, and then that tasted really good together. So I enjoyed that. Another girl brought in this German chocolate cake, which was delicious. So I had some of that. And I didn't eat everything that was there. There was a bunch of cookies or there was a strawberry cake with a cream cheese frosting, which I don't like cream cheese frosting. I don't like that tang of cream cheese. So I wish she had done just a regular icing, because I would have loved the strawberry cake. And then this other girl made like a baked ziti with some garlic bread, and she brought this it was a store-bought cake that had like it was lemony with an icing. I don't know. It wasn't that appealing to me. I was very into the chocolate German cake, so I stuck with that. I had like 3 pieces of that. And I took a piece of the garlic bread. It wasn't the best garlic bread I've had, but it's bread. It's got garlic on it. How bad can it be, right? So anyway, that was fun. It was nice to get together with everybody and see everyone in person again. And yeah, and what else? So Friday was our potluck, and we do get to take home free pizza from the kitchen. So I grabbed a pizza for later, had a little pizza later. So yeah, those were my tasty treats of the week. I hope all of you have had some delicious, tasty treats this week yourselves. All right, let's get into my podcast review. Now, as some of you know who've been listening to me, I often do some vapid, superficial topics on this show. And then sometimes I do some deeper, more meaningful, serious topics. And for this one, I wanted to talk about the SNAP program. Now, and this thing that happens in our country, which shouldn't happen, that there are people going hungry in America, which doesn't seem like it should happen with our overabundance of food. And it's crazy to me that people go hungry in our country, and there is food insecurity. And some of you live in America that listen to the show, and some of you don't. But recently our government shut down, and I think in November I only talked about how it could potentially affect me and my flight home. Very selfish, very just thinking of myself and getting home to my family, which of course I'm going to think about that, right? But what I didn't talk about is I did see firsthand how this was affecting people across Arizona, for example. At my regular job, I talk to everyone. I talk to people that are very wealthy, that have multiple homes, that have, properties that they rent out and are really secure financially. And then I talk to people that just got laid off or have been laid off who have been trying to find work, or single parents trying to keep the lights on, or just people that are on disability. They only are on Social Security and they rely on their SNAP benefits to make ends meet. And I feel ashamed that I didn't do this topic earlier, but this was a topic covered on burnt toast, which is that I've done actually quite a few show reviews from this podcast. And burnt toast it's hosted by Virginia Soul-Smith, who is a fat activist. And again, I am sometimes the person that she's critiquing, right? And I'm sometimes the people that I'm sometimes the category of person that she might feel is problematic, right? Because I do work hard to stay at a certain weight, where she has let go of that. She is very about self-acceptance and body neutrality, and I'm someone that clearly, I see the problems with fat phobia. I clearly have my own internalized fat phobia. On the last show, I talked about internalized ageism, which I've become keenly aware of through some of the podcasts I listen to. I'm like, ooh, that might be me. But I do, regardless of whether I agree with everything she says or whether she, I still learn a lot from her. She's very intelligent. She's very well spoken. She very much is on the socialist type side, on the, supporting a lot of causes and doing a lot of good for the world, right? It's so interesting to see the disparity in our country. And there's people that look at Jeff Bezos and his wife, Mackenzie. Mackenzie's given out $7 billion, whereas Jeff is buying his sexy new wife this rock that's like she can barely carry around, and he's on his super yacht, and so he clearly spends his money differently, and his ex-wife is way more philanthropic. So I think it's interesting, the difference in belief systems of giving and charity, and this was a very interesting topic because it talked about some of the internalized feelings around giving, and it made me very reflective on my own biases and maybe problematic ways that I think about who I'm giving to and what they might do with that money, right? So I'm going to circle around. I know I'm speaking very high level here, but so Virginia Soul-Smith, now she did make this very political, right? She was the title of this topic, if you want to go listen to it, because it was a great episode. The topic was SNAP is the perfect target for MAHA, right? Make America Healthy Again. And I talked about in my last show, which the last show was behind a paywall. I did, and sometimes I leave my stronger political opinions for behind that paywall because, again, I don't think it's always the smartest to always just espouse every single political belief that you have. It can be very polarizing with some people and sometimes not appropriate. But I do have very strong beliefs about certain things. And I'm an independent, right? I'm not Republican or Democrat. So I am able to see both sides of some of the issues, and I don't fit into one category, right? Some of my beliefs are very liberal in certain ways, and some of my beliefs are more conservative. So I did think that this was a really interesting topic. So she had on this woman named Rachel Cahill, 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 a longtime anti-hunger policy advocate who's based in Ohio. So Rachel and her team support national and state level organizations fighting every day to end hunger and poverty in the United States. And most of her work focuses on making SNAP, which is the government supplemental nutrition assistance program, the most effective, accessible, and equitable program it can be in every community. And I didn't do this podcast review line for line. So if you're interested in this topic, I would encourage you to go listen to that show because it's very well done. Rachel is a wealth of information if you do want to give at this time of year. A lot of people do more charity this time of year. I know I certainly do. I personally am very, very frugal in my everyday life, and I'm more frugal with people around me. But every year I do like to give a percentage of my income to a charity that is worthy of it. I have been giving to Peter Singer's. It's like a life you can change. Or I heard about Peter Singer on a podcast from Ryan Holiday, who does the Daily Stoic, and he has a lot of very philanthropic people on here. I was impressed when he had Singer on his podcast because he told the story about a watch. He had been given this very, very expensive watch that he could have kept, he could have sold. He ended up giving it to charity. As soon as he was given it, he's like, oh, this would be better off to be auctioned off for this better cause. And I admire people like that because I don't know that I would do that. If I was given a Rolex, I'd probably be rocking that thing to all the high-end events I go to and pretending I'm bougie. And again, I think there's different levels of, philanthropic endeavors and ways of being and generosity. And I'm nowhere near the top. I try to do what I can, and I feel it's the right thing to do. He did have someone else recently on there. I was trying to go back and find it. I just didn't have a lot of time to go search this person out. But this guy said something to me that made me immediately want to start giving in this way. He said there's 3 really important things that you can do that everybody in America should be doing. And he said, because you receive these benefits yourself and you take them for granted. He said one of them is blood donation. He said, if you get into a horrible accident, he goes, you will get that blood. He goes, but you might not deserve that blood. He goes, because you might have never donated. And if people don't choose to donate, then a lot of people would die. And I used to give blood regularly. And I think it was because it was easy. I was always very aware when it was happening, like on my college campus. And at one point I had to stop because I was anemic for a while. I still have very thin blood. I don't think I'm anemic, but I do have I have low iron in general. But I am at this point very healthy and can give. And it made me immediately search for my nearest donation center. And I'm going to get back into that. So I think that's something I can definitely do. And he's totally right. Another one that if I get this opportunity now that I've heard this podcast, it influenced me enough that I will say, yes, I will serve jury duty. I have gotten out of jury duty every single time I've gotten that letter. And, I've always had legitimate reasons, right? Work and blah, blah, blah. But could I have made it happen? Probably. And that one I'm not feeling as bad about, right? I definitely want to give blood. Since I've lived in Arizona, I haven't gotten any of those notices. So I'm like, okay, well, whatever. But, and I can't remember the third. That's one of the reasons I wanted to go back and find that episode. I was like, what is that third one? I can't remember. But the blood donation is the one that stood out the most because I'm in a period right now where I don't have a lot of extra money to give. I would want to give a higher percentage of my income if I was in a position to do that. And, but I can give my time, my company recently, my company that I work for does a lot of charity as well. They let us, apply to go out and volunteer, and actually we're paid for that, but the company pays us to give our time. And instead of working, we would actually go out and do charity. So I love that my company does that. And I'm going to start to get more and more involved in the charity work that this company does. And so one thing that they did, they had me go out shopping for this little girl. And I took a lot of time to and put a little bit of my own money in to get her some nice things that were on her list. And I felt good. As much as I didn't have a lot to give, I had my time, and I segmented some time to do that. and then the blood donation, right? That'll take some time, but it's not going to cost me anything. And it's something that I can take action on now and do that really is important and meaningful. So I do think that hearing about these things and putting action behind them are important. And I'm not the most philanthropic or the most generous, but I try to do my part. And I think we all should try to do stuff. Like I listened to the Good Guys podcast, and Josh Peck, who's a celebrity, he does feed the streets, or he participates in this charity where he's out there feeding the homeless. And he talks about it quite a bit. You can tell he feels good that he takes time to go and do this. He's teaching his children to do a lot of charity, to give back. He talks about how he, takes his son with him and he says, see, Max, this is what you should do. You are very lucky that we're safe. We have our house, we have plenty to eat. And he's teaching his son the importance of giving back and charity. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, juxtaposition, his co-host, like Ben Soffer, who I love, I'm a huge fan. They're him and his wife. They are Trump supporters. They don't really talk about that much, and they've said things along. I've listened to them both for years. His wife is the host of the Toast podcast, Claudia Oshry, and I'm sure they give in their own ways. I don't think, from stuff that they've said through their podcast, because I've listened to them for a long time, I don't think they're definitely not as philanthropic or as charitable as say Josh, for example. And again, not everyone it's not a competition, right? But it is interesting to see both of these men. They both are very well off. They both come from really, I think that Ben comes from a more well-off family, because I think his family, like Josh, grew up with a single mom. And anyway, there's a big difference in their beliefs and their actions behind charity. And so I just find it interesting I just think it's interesting to see the differences in people and mentalities. And obviously, with the shutdown in November, the SNAP issue was very politicized, and it was horrible. The fact that it was completely shut off, and I talked to people that didn't know how they were going to make their ends meet. They didn't know how they were going to feed their kids. It was very, very, I can't imagine the insecurity, the trauma that causes to households and to parents, to kids. So anyway, let's get into this show. So food banks, they were talking about how Rachel started talking about how during this shutdown, this is the first it's ever happened. There's never been a time in our entire history where the SNAP program has ceased to function. And she said that food banks were just stretched to the max. They were in crisis mode. She said these food banks were never meant to feed people on this level. And she talks about how the SNAP benefits just completely froze, and it traumatized over 40 million people rely on SNAP benefits and had no idea where their next meal was going to come from. And then Virginia brought up the fact that this is forcing families to have to juggle where they put their money. Because they used to have this benefit for food, which they could use some of their money to cover their mortgage or their rent or utilities or whatever. And now that they can't do that, they have to spend this money on food. Okay, are they going to miss a mortgage payment? Are they going to miss a car payment? How is that going to affect them long term, right? It's going to cost them more money. It's going to cause stress and I've been giving out the numbers to food banks for exactly this type of situation. And I can't imagine having to feed a child and working full time and wondering how you're going to make all the ends meet, pay for the rent, pay for the food for your child. Like, I can't imagine the stress on these people's shoulders. So what Rachel was saying, she said there's a saying that poverty charges interest. She said people might need to take out a high interest loan or use high interest credit cards to make their ends meet. And it is crazy. Like, the difference in how much money you save when you have good credit. And I mean, even in places I've worked, if you have good credit, you don't have to pay, for example, a deposit, which might be close to $300. But if you do have good credit, you could get that waived. And obviously it makes sense, right? Companies need to make sure that they're not going to get left with a high bill, and they need that sense of security. But it's somebody like me that has good credit and all the perks I get from my credit cards and 0% interest. And it's amazing how you benefit when you have the resources to pay your credit cards off in full each month. Some people don't have that luxury. Some people have to carry a balance, especially they had to during this very, very stressful time. And how much money that, when you have a high interest loan or a high interest credit card, it's insane how further and further in debt you get. So Rachel was talking about how it's also hard to re-qualify for benefits. She said, I think it's important for people to understand what SNAP benefits are. She said it's money that's basically put on a type of like a debit card, and it's loaded every month for groceries, but it's the equivalent of $6 a day, essentially. She said it's about what most people spend on a cup of coffee. She said it's not a generous benefit. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it is. She said it's a benefit you can only use on grocery items, and it does have a history of exclusionary policy making. She said where certain groups are just completely left out. She said, for example, HR 1 cut $200 billion from the program, and some additional exclusionary policy making, and also included some additional exclusionary policy making, which the impacts were just starting to feel. She said, for example, she said legal immigrants, people who are forced to prove that they're working over and over and over again. She said if they can't prove it, they get kicked out of the program. And she said she said then there's just the simple fact that some of the application forms are 40 pages long. She said there are a ton of administrative barriers. She said they ask extremely intrusive questions. There's a ton of verification. She said you have to do a full interview with a caseworker to renew your benefits at least every 6 months. She said so sometimes the people that most need the benefits just can't access them. And she said we try to help with this. She said another ripple effect that people don't think about is this also affects like grocery stores and economy in local economies, because the grocery store relies on people being able to use those benefits to shop. So a lot of grocery stores that as soon as this happened in November started immediately laying people off. She said because of the exclusionary policy of SNAP, there's always going to be a need for additional donations. She said, I think the other thing that holds this program back is a misunderstanding of who needs it. She said, if you did a poll, she said 90% of Americans think that we should be doing more to help people. She said, but also if you ask them, who they believe is the most common person on SNAP, she said they would say, oh, a 30-year-old hanging out in his basement playing video games. And she said, so there's a big misconception that there's a lot of people in our society just not pulling their weight, and that's who's benefiting. But if you really look at these programs, most of the people on SNAP are elderly, disabled people, and children, working parents that have kids at home and need it to feed their kids. And so she said the little sliver of able-bodied people that can work and just choose not to work, that is very much the minority. And she said, she said it's intentional. She said it's used by politicians who want to attack the program. She said it's been a long-standing political strategy in our country. And Virginia said she was curious to ask Rachel's take on the rhetoric from RFK and Maha around all of this. And she said, is that leading to policing what people can spend their SNAP benefits on and what kind of food people have access to? And Rachel said, I don't think that people vote based on SNAP. She said, I do think that this issue is more bipartisan than people think. She said, if you look at the comment sections for people who are anti-SNAP, she said, you'll always see comments that are disparaging the program. She said, but if you really look and read them, and read between the layers of racism and misogyny, she said, most people's story is that they themselves were denied benefits when they were at their greatest need. She said people will be like, well, I lost my job and I didn't get approved for that program, or my mom was disabled and we couldn't get her qualified. And she said if our country really made sure that everybody that needed it did get access to this program, there would be a greater overall public support for it, like Social Security is supported, for example. And she said a lot of people I talked to, sometimes they're just slightly over that income level and they're mad that they lost their benefits because of that. Maybe they got a slight raise or they were finally able to find that slightly better job that paid them a little bit more. And then that disqualifies them from receiving these benefits that they still need. It's not like, it could be like $100 more a month that they're making at their job. And then they lose all these benefits. She said, it's horrible how that's happening. She said the great irony of all of this is that SNAP benefits are one of the ways to ensure that you can make Americans healthy again. She said studies show that kids that have had access to SNAP have better economic outputs later in life. They're healthier as adults. They work more. She said food banks have actually been working with insurance companies and other healthcare providers to come up with food boxes that are more fit for people that are going through like specific conditions like cancer treatment or diabetes. And these are tailored meals that SNAP pays for. So she said all of that improves health. And she said Maha has become more about policing food. So it was kind of the perfect target. We saw this flurry of bills trying to control or restrict what kind of food people purchased with SNAP benefits. She said in some states it was soda, in other states it was candy or baked goods. She said in Iowa, basically if it's not a vegetable or legume, it's not in the program. And now I will say, as I listened to this, I remember when they were talking about making it so people couldn't pay for soda with their SNAP benefits. And I was like, well, that's not a bad idea. I will admit, someone like me, and I understand what they're saying, that it shouldn't be us telling people how to eat, how to choose, moralizing food choices. Yes. But we've also talked about on this podcast, and I think it's been talked about in Virginia's podcast, that not everyone has access to education on nutrition, right? There might be parents that do want to do as best as they can for their kids and find the most nutritious food items to provide their children. Maybe they don't know what that is. Maybe could it be a good thing that SNAP does have more guidelines for what you can spend it on? Again, I understand why they're saying that this is moralizing and policing what people can eat. But is there another side to it where it can help educate what's better food choices? And they point out later on that, well, people are just going to buy things differently. They're still going to buy that stuff. It's just that they might be spending money that they would have spent somewhere else on that food, or buying in a different order. So I kind of see both sides of this. My health nut side does see the sense in this. and understanding that not everyone has education to nutrition education, right? And I wouldn't want somebody telling me I can't buy something that I want, right? If I'm going to buy that bag of candy or chips or whatever, I don't want somebody telling me I can't spend my money on that. And I get that this is government subsidized, but again, if I don't want someone policing my food choices, why should someone that's on government assistance have their food choices? So I do see both sides of it, but I just want to admit that I have thought that that's not necessarily like the worst thing, even though they are talking about it like it is terrible. And again, I see their point, but anyway, moving on. She said, my long-term view of this is we are going to have to see the harm done in certain states and the mess it makes for retailers. Because the cost and responsibility was put on the grocery stores to police the lines and what people were buying. She said, what I hope happens is that states speak up, that they see the harms that are done, and then we can walk it back and see that this MAHA thing was just a fad that hopefully we can recover from. She said, regardless, people can't meet all of their grocery needs with SNAP. So you may change the order that people check out. You know, maybe they put the fresh, healthy foods towards the front. They pay for that with their SNAP card, and they're still going to buy their kid that birthday treat that they want. She said, so I just think it's a waste of time and money, and I hope it's a fad that we can move on from. So Virginia talked about how back in the early 2000s, this was an issue, and they were trying to ban soda at that point from being purchased with SNAP. She said this idea that what people need is for wealthy white people to tell them how to eat, and that will solve hunger. And no, obviously that's not going to solve hunger, but if there is an epidemic of childhood obesity and childhood diabetes, and part of the issue is that these kids are guzzling soda because they're not taught they don't have the nutrition education. Because I talk about all the time, like, there's privilege in being able to think about these things, being able to choose organic, being able to think about consuming things that make your skin glow. It's like, this is all luxury, right? There's people just trying to survive out there that don't have the ability to think about these things or spend time shopping and juicing their own juice. And we're very fortunate. We're very blessed. We're very privileged to be able to do that. And yeah, a lot of white people are they are the privileged people. And yes, Virginia's talking about, these white people that shouldn't be teaching, preaching, and moralizing what people should do. Well, a lot of the educated, wealthier people in general in this country are the ones that have been able to have that education on proper nutrition. Rachel then said that, she's like, you're right. So the instinct has been there for a long time. It will probably remain. She said the American Heart Association came out in support of these bills. She said some doctors groups came out and supported some of these bills. She said, but what it ended up coming down to is how do you define the ingredients? For example, soda. The proposal started out being anything that has bubbles in it was soda. And she's like, well, therefore you can't buy it with SNAP. But then you have the doctor saying, well, wait, I actually told my patients that they should drink diet soda or that lower calorie, lower sugar soda. So she said when it got down to the definitions, it became more difficult to pass these restrictions because there is no universal healthy or unhealthy when you're talking about foods. And Virginia was like, yeah, she said, this conversation reminds me of the whole ultra processed food conversations when you talk about definitions. She said, because the reality is a lot more food falls under the processed category than one would like to think, and shouldn't have judgment on it because of that. Virginia talked about how the Burnt Toast community, her podcast community, is a community of givers. She said, but I do think a lot of stuff comes up for people when they think about giving. She said, for example, she said a lot of people might think, am I just going to give money to someone and they're just going to spend it on whatever they're going to spend it on that I might not personally agree with. She said, talk about some of the issues around mutual aid and some of the concerns that you hear. And Rachel said, well, there's a long history of mutual aid, a long history of people in times of crisis have wrapped their arms around each other and supported each other and shared what they had in these times of crisis. She said, but my feeling is cash gives people the dignity they need to make decisions that are in their own best interest. She said, we believe that if people have the cash, they can make smart decisions about what their family needs. I have no idea if you need a bus pass, or if you need a pack of cigarettes, to get through that day, or you need money for rent, whatever you need to get through that day as a human being. She said, you should have that autonomy to decide what that is. And this made me, again, self-reflect on my own thought process around when I give, right? And I feel like mine is more, when I give, I want to make sure that almost every penny is going to that charity. You hear about all these charities where it just benefits the people hosting that charity, I didn't want that. I didn't want 80% of it to go in the pockets of these people forming the charity or working there. I want it to go to the people fighting malaria, providing education for women and children in underdeveloped countries. And that's always been my biggest concern. However, it did make me self-reflect about my thoughts around people that are begging on the side of the road, right? And I don't like to admit this, but my worry was always like, oh, I'm just going to give them money and they're going to go spend it on drugs or alcohol, which they didn't bring that up here. I would have, again, it sounds like from the way that she's answering is, well, let them, Mel Robbins, let them spend it on whatever they want to spend. Let them go buy their drugs. Maybe that's what they need to get through their day. For me, even now, even after hearing this, I don't like the idea of giving cash and having it spent on drugs or alcohol. I would want it spent on feeding themselves for the day, or putting a roof over their heads for that day, if that's an option. And so I absolutely do have some moralizing feelings around what that money is spent on, right? And I think it does align with what she's saying is problematic with Maha. They shouldn't be spending it on candy and cigarettes and soda. And there is a little piece of me that agrees with that. I don't like the fact that it's moralizing and trying to police or control what other people spend it on. But obviously, I don't think people should be smoking cigarettes. My dad died a horrible death, COPD, partially, and obviously he had his heart attacks, which added to his vascular issues. But I don't think people should be spending money that they're getting from the government on cigarettes or me. Again, I understand that is, again, moralizing, policing, but there is some of that. Now, I think what Virginia's talking about is she's saying that that's a problem, that people would give more if they didn't have that thought process. And maybe this will educate me to try to get over that thought process. And again, I think my concern of making sure that, like you heard about, I think Spencer Pratt, who lost his house in the LA fires, and then they had this huge benefit concert where all these celebrities took part in it and donated their time and their skills to raise money for these victims of this fire. And then he took his time to go and investigate where that money went and how many people that were directly impacted by the fire, how much money got delivered to those people. And he couldn't find any. He couldn't see where that money went and did it actually help people. He's like, what the fuck? Where's that money? And that is my concern. That is my biggest concern, is I don't want to give to a charity that's just going to line the pockets of, again, the people that ran that charity. No, that's my biggest concern. it sounds like coming up with these restrictions on what people can spend money on, i.e., soda, cigarettes, candy, baked goods, all the things that they're talking about. And it's very difficult to create these definitions to put those restrictions in place. I can get over that, right? If people do want to go and spend it on soda, that's what they're going to spend. Okay. Like, to me, that's not the biggest issue. For me, if I'm giving to a charity, I did want it to just make sure it's a reputable charity where the money is going to go where it's supposed to go. Do I think that if there was a way that they could restrict the soda, do I think it's the worst idea? No. But I do see the problematic thought around that. So I see the points. I can't help the health nut in me, the side of me that does want people to be educated, want people to have equitable access to that nutrition education. And in that same vein, they should have equitable choices of what they spend their money on, right? We do. I just went out and bought some candy and we'll be enjoying it. So again, I'm like educating myself right here on this podcast, but I do see the that it is problematic to try to police what people spend that government money on, or charitable money. So anywho, but I like to be honest. I like to be accountable for things that I do think about, because again, I think that my beliefs and things are also evolving. I did reach out to a friend of mine who is a MAGA supporter, and I just wanted her thought about it. I wanted to get her opinion. I wanted to see what she thought about SNAP and what she thought about Social Security too, because Rachel in this show did talk about how Social Security is widely accepted and understood, that it's important for people to have access to it and to keep it intact for future generations. And let me see, I want to find her. I'm going to just read you what she said. So I just asked her, what are your thoughts on, do you believe SNAP benefits should exist? Do you think they're important to keep in place? And separately, do you believe in the need for Social Security to stay in place in our country? And this is a girl who was out there with signs supporting MAGA. And so she's a very, very huge Trump supporter, and so an RFK supporter. And I wanted to see what she would respond with. And she said, yes, SNAP benefits should be a safety net for struggling families. There should be very strict guidelines on who gets these benefits, and there should be time limits on those benefits, with allowability for renewal based on qualifying circumstances. Now, look, I do agree that I think so. Before I heard the Burnt Toast podcast, I would have wholeheartedly agreed with this. Now that I understand from Rachel's perspective how difficult it can be to qualify initially and stay qualified, and the additional administrative aspects that have been recently voted in, I think that her idea of the strict guidelines, legal immigrants, I do believe should have access to SNAP. I personally believe that. She didn't talk about legal immigrants. I don't know if she would. I don't think illegal immigrants should. I think that legal immigrants should. I wonder I should have asked her about that. And again, the time restrictions, I think that Rachel talked about how it should be every 6 months. I think it should be annually. I think that it is a lot especially if you're a single parent working multiple jobs to try to make ends meet. These applications are that extra work, and every 6 months, that's a lot of work to go through. She said, Social Security should stay in place with caveats. I haven't looked into it enough to give you specifics on age requirements, etc. However, let's just say anybody age 40 and over should not lose their existing benefits. Anyone 20 to 40 starts to move into a hybrid model of a Social Security 401k type of account. And then anybody under 20 does not have Social Security. And these people move to a completely privatized model. She said this would allow for a generational shift from a Social Security model to more of a 401k retirement model. And then that way each person can either control it themselves or they could invest in a specific retirement year fund. She said, obviously, this is a very broad brushstroke answer to your question. And if ever tasked to actually look into this, I would have to do a lot more due diligence or understanding on the ages of the person, like different demographics I mentioned, and how that would look as far as moving from a complete government fund and slowly changing the generational shift to a more privatized over the next 60 to 100 years. But generally speaking, this is my philosophy on both. I don't really get the 401k retirement model, because my understanding of 401k is, and unless you have a government match or a company match, maybe the government should match it. That's actually not a bad idea. But anyway, you have to be able to have enough money to contribute. And some people are living paycheck to paycheck and can't put any money into savings or retirement and rely on Social Security being that safety net if they haven't been able to save any money or put any money towards retirement. So I'm not sure. Again, this is all through text, so I don't really understand exactly what she's saying. But anyway, that was her opinion. It was nice to see that she supports both. And I think that's what Rachel's saying, is that there is bipartisan support. I don't think that the Democrats obviously are proponents of SNAP, and I think most Republicans are. I don't think Republicans like the fact that the SNAP benefits. I think the fact that they were lost across the country, I think that was something that Republicans did not like. It was used politically, but I don't think the Republicans like that. I think there is broader support, like Rachel said. It's interesting because I'm obviously not reading comments on like SNAP comments. She is. She knows way more about it. She knows more about the research done. She understands that the comments are from people that could not access the program, that needed the program. That was very eye-opening. And again, I think taking a hard look at myself, my own morality on some of these ideas, and again, I think it's important that we all self-reflect, and if we want to be better versions of ourselves every year, I think it is important to tackle some of these harder topics and to be introspective and to have these conversations. And I think that I try to take a more balanced approach. I think that burnt toast is definitely very liberal, very more socialism and the social welfare aspects, which obviously I believe in. But yeah, I really, really good and important topics. And Rachel is a wealth of information. She says so much more in this show. She talks about ways you can support locally. And I think, because before I donated to that charity, Peter Singer's, I actually did want to find something more local because of some of the conversations I've had, and I understand the need. I did want to find something that would have a greater impact directly, but I was, again, one of the topics in this show, I was worried about giving to a charity that the money wouldn't reach the people that need it. And so I wasn't sure who to trust or where to go. She gave some really good topics about finding like local social justice organizations, and she actually mentioned some in Arizona. So really good tips, things that I will take from, learn from, make into actionable items for myself. And I would love if you have any strong opinions or thoughts on this topic. Please feel free to share them with me. You can DM me at the Diet Obsessed Podcast. You can follow me there too if you don't already. Love to see new followers and hear from everybody that's listening. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. There's no cost for that, but it will ensure that you get notified once these shows come out. And then if you do want a show every single week, you can subscribe through Patreon. Just download the Patreon app and search the Diet Obsessed podcast. And until we meet again, I hope all of you have a very balanced week and a happy holiday season. I will talk to you in the new year.